This is Tom Myers, Superintendent, Bellevue Community School District in Bellevue, Iowa, coming to you with this week's Believe in the Do update. It's kind of the comment highlights from the board meeting on Wednesday night. It was our first board meeting of the month of November, and our first board meeting with new school board members. The meeting was actually called to order by Penny Meetinger, our board secretary, and we accept the abstract of election results with the top vote getters being Marty Plussel, Janet Sieverding, and Matt Wedeking. So we had an oath actually given to those three members. Then an election was held within the board members that also included Allison Boniface and Mike Reed. And Mike Reed was elected president. Janet Sieverding was elected vice president, the role that she had prior to the election as well. We also decided to have regular board meetings at the same time, the second Monday of the month at 6:30. So that is when those will be, unless something special goes on. We need to change that, but that is the plan of when they will be on a monthly basis as we've had for the last several years. The board approved the consent agenda. Some highlights of that included Scott Jess as middle school girls basketball coach, and then co-head coaches for boys bowling being Riley Till and Randy Weber, and then Jane Sieverding was hired as a substitute bus driver. But back to the bowling, Riley and Randy will be sharing that position. Are new to coaching here, but certainly not new to bowling in not only Bellevue in this area, but across the state and probably across the nation in Maine, with two very good people for our people to work with that way, our students to work with. Representative Andy McKean visited as well, and he discussed a variety of different things that way, and some things that he focused on overall were the aspect of how budgets and funding for schools and how that is going, what his hopes are for the future. He talked about transportation equity, making all districts, more equitable in their transportation, because some districts have to spend more money on transportation than other districts, and how do you equal that out that way? If you have a large district, you have a lot of buses, a lot of routes, a lot of miles to travel, it's much different than a metro area where their bus routes are very small and they don't have to take as much money out of the general fund, which also pays for a variety of other things, including salaries, heating, cooling, all things like that, things that don't fall in other areas. So trying to get that. Andy has been a huge advocate for that for not only the Bellevue School District, but school districts across Jackson County and his area as a whole, but also across the state of Iowa. He also talked about school vouchers some, school board election dates, having them all together. And he talked about mental health in schools. We also had a comic curriculum piece presented by Tracy Till, a fifth grade teacher. We have been doing mindfulness, kind of a self-regulation for students in the classrooms, provided by some staff members from Dubuque at the mindfulness area that way, that they talk about that. So that went very well. She's talked about how it helps students to regulate what they're doing during the day and that self-control. Then we moved into enrollment review and finance discussion. As I mentioned before, enrollment is up. It's a 15.6% increase from 250 to 290 students in our elementary building. Our high school building has went up in the last 5 years from 374 students to 384 students, which is about a 2.6% increase. And overall, across the district, including preschool, we've had a 10.1% increase from 695 students to 765. Our preschools actually went up nearly 30% that way. Talk about where our students open enrollment numbers that way. We have 75 students who are open enrolled into Bellevue, choosing to come to Bellevue from other districts, and 14 are choosing to go elsewhere other than Bellevue that way. So that's a very positive number and helps the budget that way. I also talked about a little graph here, and I can post this at some point. In fact, it's on the comment highlights right now on the website that way, of how funds are used from general fund to management fund to the voted PEPAL to debt service to the SAVE, the state penny, and then the PEARL, which we don't have, is for parks and recreation that way, public education recreation levy. The Bellevue Community School District does not have that, and many districts across the state of Iowa do not have that way too. Also talked about approving something for the School Budget Review Committee with a modified allowable growth. It is not cash, but just gives us authority to spend that money that we have to send for a student who moves into our district, but they're attending another district and then they go back to that district that way. So we have funds to take care of that, or the authority to spend that money. Let's talk about a book called Disrupting Thinking that way. And really the emphasis on that was life is more than a test score. Life is more than how I do on this assignment, but life is about how am I prepared for life? How can I apply my learning? And how can I really be successful in life after high school, after second grade, third grade, and that's where it all starts. It starts in elementary and moving on up that way. But Disrupting Thinking, if anyone's interested, I do have that book. I'd be happy to share that with you. I think it's a very quality book talking about a focus on reading, but how do you make reading and other subjects more applicable and for students to apply their learning in other ways. We also talk somewhat about the ACT scores that way. We give our ACT to every student in their junior year, typically that way, but we wanted to see where our students were at is the reason we're doing that. We want to see where our students are at overall. It's a basic college entrance exam that students need to take, whether they're going to a 4-year school, 2-year school, looking to get a year training or some type of professional credential. This allows them to see what are their skill areas, what are their strengths that way, more than just the typical things in school. It is always imperative to know and share accurate information when sharing data about ACT and other tests. And if anybody ever wants to talk about that, I'm more than happy to do that. The key thing to remember when you look at ACT scores is the aspect that we test all students. And to compare us to every other school that most schools do not test all students is unfair. It's a skewed number, but if we take our top 60% that way, which is right around the state average amount of students that take it, we're well above the state average. For example, our composite score there is 22.8 when we look at our top 60% of students, when the state average is 21.6. So just so you know, overall we're at 20.6, which is not a bad score, but it is below the state average, but we're testing roughly 60 students every year that way. The Iowa statewide assessment of student progress is out actually, still analyzing the information, and other districts across the state are as well. It gives us an idea of our kids who are proficient, but also advanced proficient, those who are above the proficiency level even, and then students who are not proficient that way. And looking at things, we are above some areas, slightly below in other areas, and at the state average in other areas that way. So it is one more assessment to look at other things that we do that way, just so you have an idea that way. We are also looking at space for next year. As I've mentioned before, the board will have a work session on December 2nd at the elementary building to tour the building there, talk about options within the building, talk about portable buildings or modulars as people will call them, and what the options are there overall. But we will be having a meeting on Monday, December 2nd at the elementary, a work session just to kind of go through the building and talk about what some other options may be. We approved a student teaching agreement with Iowa State University that way for teachers, and that goes for 5 years. We had some information items for the board members and talked about the manufacturing tours when we toured Plastics Unlimited in Preston, Collins Aerospace here in Bellevue, and Husco in Maquoketa, and what they're looking for employees. And going back to that testing conversation, what are they looking for? They don't necessarily care what an ACT score is, although they want someone who's capable of doing work. They don't really care necessarily about that Iowa testing score, although they want someone who can do well, but they want someone with the grit, resilience, work ethic of attendance, working hard, being self-directed, and everything like that. That way, as a whole, there are notes on the website if you want to look at that way, and I encourage you to do that. It's very educational for our staff and also for our students. We took all sophomores to the tour at a separate time as well. The Bellevue Education Association was recognized by our employees as the bargaining unit in an election that was held here. The Bellevue Community Survey information of different things that roughly about 140 people filled out that way. That is on the website as well under superintendent, just like where the comment highlights are, so you can look at that information. And then the superintendent, myself, will have an evaluation by the board, kind of an informal evaluation. My formal evaluation is always in June, or typically in June. This is kind of a mid-year one we have in December or January usually, and with the board elections just happening in November, it made sense to hold that off until January this year. So we will have an informal open session evaluation for the superintendent at that time. So at this time, I want to sign off here. Hopefully, weather cooperates through Thanksgiving and beyond. That way, we did have a late start on Tuesday. On Monday, excuse me, we moved the Veterans Day program to Tuesday as a result of that, and the Veterans Day meal that our student council provided free of charge to our veterans and their families. So you kind of have an idea there where things are at. We try to make that decision, if at all possible, by 6 a.m. and actually try to make it by 5:30 if we can at all. And then late starts just about 2 hours after that. Typically we try to do that. You'll hear about it. If we have a 2-hour late start, you will likely hear by 8 o'clock if we are going to cancel school or do something else in that regard. So just wanted to give you that way. We try to cancel morning activities if we believe the weather is not going to be cooperating in the morning. There's a chance of that, so you're aware of that as well, and try to send out various methods of notification for that way. So have a great one, everyone.